from the Medical University of South Carolina. You know, Black History Month is always for us to celebrate our accomplishments as a community. And again, we are doing that so forth tonight with the Mighty Sixth District. Before we begin further with the program, I would like to introduce our district chaplain, Brother Travis Alexander, to introduce us and lead us off with a word of prayer. Brother Alexander, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Brother DR, and good evening, brothers. Please bow your heads with me. Dear Heavenly Father, the supreme bossless of the universe and the keeper and sustainer of all souls, we give thee thanks for this day and all of its sundry activities. We humbly ask your blessings upon this webinar tonight, highlighting and commemorating the life and universal legacy of this world-renowned biologist and university professor, born on the soil of the Mighty Sixth District, whom as a faculty advisor and mentor helped give birth to the greatest fraternity known to mankind, the Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated. Bless our district representative, Brother Kurt Walker, our executive committee, the entire brotherhood, and our guest historian and presenter, Dr. Reeves. This we ask, in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, brothers and our guests. Tonight, I have the distinct honor and pleasure with introducing a young man. I say that very nice and candidly and humbly, but Dr. Reeves has been working hard at the Medical University of South Carolina for many years now, and we made our acquaintance maybe somewhere over 15 or 20 years ago. And I'm proud of all he's done, and I'm going to introduce him, and I'm going to let him go further with the floor in a few moments. But just for his introduction, brothers and sisters, Dr. Titus Reeves is an assistant professor in the Department of Regenerative Medicine and Cell Biology at the Medical University of South Carolina. He's also has a joint appointment in the Department of Medicine. He holds a PhD in anatomy from the University of South Carolina School of Medicine. His thesis was the understanding the biology of the basement membrane of the heart. He completed a postdoctoral fellowship at Emory University in the Department of Pathology and Laboratory Medicine, where he investigated neutrophil migration and intestinal inflammation. At MUSC, Dr. Reeves is an instructor and the anatomical basis of medicine and human anatomy to first-year medical students. Moreover, he teaches GI physiology. He has been an instructor of research ethics to first-year MD, PhD students, and Dr. Reeves is an organizer of the Ernest E. Scientific Symposium that supports diversity in graduate and medical education. In this capacity, nearly 400 undergraduate students from the states of South Carolina, North Carolina, Georgia, Florida, and Maryland attend a one-day conference on the MUSC campus and on the impact of Dr. Ernest E. PhD, role models in science and medicine, and scientific presentations by national and international scientists in an effort to increase minority student interest in science as a career. Dr. Reeves received the Basic Science Award in recognition of an exemplary research presentation at the Macro Cabrera poster session of the MNRI 7th Workshop NIDDK at the National Institutes of Health. He was nominated for an Educator Mentor Award for mentoring students at his current position at MUSC. His research aims are to understand the role that intestinal fibroblasts play in inflammation in the large intestine, and has shown that intestinal fibroblasts can function as a non-professional immune cells. That's a mouthful, and I apologize for the mispronunciation or a word or two, but this is a brief synopsis of a great man, and I'm gonna let him take the floor tonight and lead us in this dynamic discussion, and I hope brothers will open their hearts and minds to learn about our beloved founder, Dr. Ernest E. Just. With no further ado, the floor is yours, Dr. Reeves, and welcome to the brothers of the Mighty Sixth District.
Well, let me first start by saying, let me thank the Sixth District of the Omega Psi Phi fraternity for allowing me to come here tonight. And in particular, let me thank Mr. Kurt Walker, who's the district representative, for allowing me to speak to you about Ernest E. Just. Let me share my screen here.
Dr. Reeves, just one quick point before you get started.
Yes, sir.
For those in attendance, we're in webinar mode. We're live streaming on Facebook. If you have any questions, put them in the Q&A where the panelists, Dr. Reeves, Brother D.R. Walker, and our chaplain, Brother Alexander, can see those questions, and we will make sure those get read out aloud. Again, use the Q&A function to state your questions. Thank you. So, thank you, Mr. Reeves, Dr. Reeves.
Okay. All righty. So I hope everybody can see, and we'll start in just a moment. Let me bring this up. Okay, hopefully everybody can see that, and we'll get started. So let me take you back, if I will, from the period of the late 1800s, rural Charleston, South Carolina, where we'll start a journey where we'll talk about Ernest Just and some of the contributions he made not only to science but in life in general. And so this was a time that, of course, medicine was not what it is today, and of course, everything was a lot different. So I want you to get that and get that sort of in your mindset as we take this journey. And so the map I put here is Old Charleston. It's still pretty similar, although some of the roads are obviously different. And we'll start with the life and times of Dr. Ernest E. Just. So Ernest Just was born in 1883 from his parents were Charles Fraser Just and Mary Matthews. And so he had brothers and sisters. He had sisters Inez, and of course him and Hunter. And medicine not being what it is today, she actually lost a child. So that was another son that was born, but he didn't survive. Medicine wasn't obviously wasn't then what it is now. It certainly wasn't like it is now then, and with the death of a child here. Now, his father died when he was 4 years old. And let me just say, his mother was a very strong-willed woman. They were dock workers in the city of Charleston. When his father died, his mother moved to James Island, actually. Well, let me back up for a second. They actually lived on Inspection Street in Charleston. And then later on, the family moved to Calhoun Street. And if you get the opportunity to come to Charleston on Inspection Street, there is a monument dedicated to Ernest Just in that matter. So if you get a chance, you can see that. And this is not the house they were in, but it's very similar to the houses of that time. So again, they were living on Inspection Street and later moved to Calhoun Street. Now, when his father died, as I said, Just was 4 years old. Mary Just, a very strong woman, worked in the phosphate mines in James Island and saved money. She saved so much money that she purchased land from the Hillsborough plantation west of the Ashley River. She was a bit of a leader, strong-willed, and people looked up to her. So much so that when she purchased this land west of the Ashley River, and this was something that it was very common in the United States at that point in time, where African Americans, Black folk, could buy certain land and then they would inhabit it and then run things from top to bottom. And Maryville was no different. She named it after herself, and they had doctors and lawyers and garbage collectors, and there was what you would call a semblance of a mayor and that sort of thing. They pretty much ran the town. And Mary, of course, was one of the leaders, and she had purchased it, so she was very much looked up to. And even today, if you come to, if you find a way to come to Charleston, you'll see that, sorry, I had to check my computer. You'll see that it's a, sorry, my computer is messing up a little bit here. My apologies. Get this straight in a second. Okay, sorry. Anyway, I had a little computer glitch, but looks like it's taken care of now. Anyway, as I was saying, Mary started school, and it was one of a common area that African Americans would inhabit, and they ran things from top to bottom. And again, if you have an opportunity to come to Charleston, that area is still up and running. It's not, obviously it's different now, but there's that same area you can see, and there's a label saying this was Maryville, started by his mother, Mary Matthews. Now, Mary, as strong-willed as she was determined that Ernest would become an educated man. This was a big goal of hers, and she worked at it really hard. As a result of that, she, at 13 years old, he enrolled at what was called at that point, the Colored Normal Industrial Agricultural and Mechanics College, which today is South Carolina State University. Now, at that time, there was really two places that someone in Ernest's position could attend. It would be the Mechanics College, the Colored Normal Industrial Agricultural and Mechanics College, or be the Avery College, which was in Charleston. He chose what's now South Carolina State University. It took him 3 years to complete his course of study, and in 1899, he received what's called a licentiate of instruction, and that qualified to him to teach in the Black public schools of South Carolina. Now, even at that point, Ernest was a terrific writer, and he received an award while he was in attendance at, I'll just call it South Carolina State now, because of his writing ability. He was an exceptional writer. And you really could, that's something that was innate in him. So in 1899, he was pretty, in that time, I take you back to that area and that time in history, he was a pretty educated man. Not many people were educated during that time. So comparatively speaking, he was pretty educated. And so he was teaching school for Black folk really in Maryville and in other parts of the city. Now, unfortunately, the school where he was teaching burned down. That's a whole nother story. It probably was some, as you know, in that time, the racial climate was clearly not the best. And so it was burned down because at that point, they didn't want African Americans to be educated, but it burned down. Mary was insistent that Ernest would get more educated. It was a major goal of hers. And they had discussions, and Ernest decided, with Mary's advice and help, that he would go north to get an additional education. Clearly, as I indicated, there wasn't very much opportunities for Black folk to be educated during that time. And the places that he had went to, he had reached the top of his educational level. But clearly his mother wanted him to have more education. She's a strong-willed woman. That was instilled in him. So he traveled north. I might also add here that with his mother, he was deeply religious. He understood the religious teachings from his mother and from other Christian leaders, and he understood the Bible. He read about some of the teachings of this Von Harnack that he would later meet, and I'll talk about that a little bit later, but he was a deeply religious man. So he traveled north and worked on the shipping docks in New York City as a day laborer to pay for the next educational endeavors. Now, it's hard to do that. You gotta remember, I keep reassessing this. This is the late 1800s, early 1900s. He's determined to get more education. So he goes to New York and works as a day laborer to pay for education. So he has a lot of determination, a lot of drive to be better. So the next few slides, we're gonna talk a little bit about his education. And we're going to talk about individually. I'm gonna list them here and we'll individually talk about some of the contributions he made and some of his experiences when he was there. So of course, he attended Kimball Union Academy. That's where he was worked as a day laborer to attend. And during that point, he also was a bit of an athlete. And he won what was called the long stretch. Similar to the long jump, but yet it was an event he won at his at that institution. And as again, it's similar to the long jump, but it was called the long stretch in those days. He also got a BA degree from Dartmouth College, and we'll talk about that in just a second. And as you can see, he got a variety of awards while at Dartmouth. And he also taught English and biology at Howard University, and would eventually become chair of the Department of Zoology. And then lastly, for his educational experiences, he received a PhD from the University of Chicago in experimental embryology and absentia. So let's start with Kimball Union. At Kimball Union Academy, he won the prestigious writing award on 2 separate occasions. So you got to remember, we in the early 1900s, he's the only black black male there. And against all the competition, he won not 1, but 2 awards at Kimball Union Academy. And he was the editor of the newspaper. Now, even if you can think about even nowadays, they don't make you the editor of something unless you're pretty good. So he was exceptional in that regard. And I mentioned that at SC State, he was an exceptional writer. So he kind of honed in those skills and he was able to be, won this award, this prestigious writing award at Kimball on 2 occasions. And again, he was editor of the newspaper. But because of the what had been instilled in him and his mother, he wanted more education. He wanted an actual BS degree or a BA degree. He wanted an undergraduate degree. He wasn't going to go back down south, so he had to choose an institution that was somewhat similar and obviously a little bit closer together, or closer to the Kimball Union Academy. So he chose Dartmouth College. And it was at Dartmouth where he really got cut his teeth, if you will, on science and science education. This is when he really got introduced to, became intrigued about science and research and that sort of thing. Now, William Patton was a chair of the Department of Biology, chairman of biology, and he taught the Principles of Biology course that really got to Just. He was a mentor to Just, and it really made him focus and made him love science. And he became an advisor and a bit of a mentor to Ernest Just. Now, Ernest did not like Kimball Union Academy. So you got to remember, from his background, he was primarily around African Americans, black folk down in rural Charleston. So when he moved to and attended Kimball, he was the only black. And so it was a cultural difference for him. And while he excelled academically, personally, he did not excel very much at all. He was not an outcast, but he was different. His culture was different, but yet he was still able to excel academically, a very driven person. However, when he got to Dartmouth, he had some experiences at Kimball that allowed him to do better at Dartmouth because he was still in the same environment, but he had adjusted more. And you can see by the picture here that's on the right of your screen here, these are some of the friends that he made. He began to adjust to his new life, his new culture enlightenment, if you will, and he did well, a little bit more better socially. And like everybody, and like we all did, Ernest had a sophomoric slump in some of his grades, but he would eventually become graduate Phi Beta Kappa with awards in sociology, botany, history, and zoology, and graduated magna cum laude. So he was top. In short, he was top dog, and that's because of his upbringing, the strong upbringing and base that his mother gave him, and what was instilled in him, and how he proceeded forward. And I might also add here that you could literally write a book on Mary Matthews Just. She was really a remarkable person. So it's understandable how Ernest became the person that he is today. where he was down back then. Okay, so he graduated. Now, once he graduated, the question was, where would he then get his, where would he teach? Because typically in those days, I mean, you either teach or you did research. He was an African-American man, so he was probably going to teach at least first. So the question is, what part of the country? Well, there were two areas. There was Morehouse College in Atlanta, and there was Howard University in Washington, D.C. And because of his experiences in the South, which were not obviously not the best, he decided to go to Howard University in Washington, D.C. So he obviously tried to get a job there and was offered a job. And he taught English and biology at Howard. Remember, I indicated he was a terrific writer. So he had to, I mean, English was going to be a part of what he did. And of course, he understood science very well. And so that was his calling. Now, it's interesting. This is a typical classroom where Dr. Just would teach some of his science classes at Howard. He was such a brilliant man that he could write backwards. And when he would write formulas and write on the blackboard, he would actually write backwards and it would come out straight. He was just that much of a smart guy. And the Therapeutic Hall is where some of the science was taking place here and also where his office was. But this is a typical classroom for him. And of course, that's his signature. Now, I like this picture because this is what's called the Valley. And this is a picture of what it looked like in Ernest Just day. And if you, the Therapeutic Hall is going to be back over here somewhere. But what's really interesting about this is where students, and obviously some faculty too, would kind of hang out and kind of, they would have graduation ceremonies here, many community programs. They'd have events where they would try and feed or provide food for people that were disadvantaged and that sort of thing. So it was really a cultural event where the students and Howard University would provide opportunities for people who were not there, and also for their students doing homecoming events and that sort of thing. And this was, it was called the Valley, and this is what it looked like in Ernest Just day. Now, in 1956, there was a hall dedicated to Ernest Just and displays his name. The architects were Hilliard Robinson and Paul Williamson. And so I won't elaborate a lot on this, but Howard didn't treat Just, what wasn't the best university to treat it Just. And some of it was a sign of the times because they wanted him to teach medical students. Just loved research. His goal was to do research, and so there was conflict there. And so Howard wanted him to teach medical students. He wanted to do research, but he was strong-willed, and he pushed through that. But nonetheless, there was some conflict that happened at that point. Now, I'll talk about something that we all are perhaps interested in, and that is on November 17th at Howard, 1911, with Frank Coleman, Oscar Cooper, and Edgar Love, and Ernest Just, what would become the Omega Psi fraternity. The key thing here from Ernest Just's perspective is that the university was a little bit mistrustful. I mean, this is something, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? And Just was the liaison from the students to the faculty administration, and he would talk to them, and he would be a mediator to make sure that this would be that the fraternity would not only start but would flourish during his time. And that was his major contribution, along with meeting with them and helping them to formulate what would become the Omega Psi Phi fraternity. And of course, everyone's grateful to Ernest Just for that. Now, also during this time, he had some personal interactions. He met Ethel Highwarden, and so she had some German ancestry here. And she was from a well-to-do family from Ohio, and her family, they had money, and she was highly educated. She could speak 7 languages. So she was a very educated woman. And in those days, she was also at Howard, but she had to take a back seat because that's just the way it was. They got married and she had to go to Dunbar School to teach because he was the male, and he had the position there. So it was, they couldn't have both of them teaching there. So then she ended up going to Dunbar to teach. But she was a very highly educated woman and a very accomplished woman in her own right. And of course, they married and they had 3 children: High Warden, Maribel, and Margaret. So just to break off just for a second, High Warden went to live to Georgia because it was, and he was a school principal, very smart man. It's just that it was very hard to compete with his dad. So of course he left and went to Georgia. And the other 2, Maribel stayed in DC and Margaret went to New York. This is a nice picture of the house that they lived in Washington, DC. We got to remember that Just was working, had 3 kids to raise and to take care of. He was working, teaching, and also trying to squeeze a little bit of research at the time. You got to remember his salary was about $5,000 a year. That ain't much today, but in those times, he was a part of the elite class in Washington. He was an elite person. He was making more money than a lot of white people, to be honest with you. If you correlate that today, it was close to about 300 or 400K is what he was making and that's a picture of the actual house that they lived in. The foundation that was started by Wesley Jarman, that I'll talk about a little bit later, was trying to purchase that, but that didn't happen. And so at this point, I'm not sure what's going on with it, but they were trying to get it to be an historic landmark. And at this point, I'm not sure what happened, but this is the house he lived in. And again, he was a part of the elite class of Washington, DC. So I put this in because Just was going through a difficult time. It was the best of times for him, but it was the worst of times because he wanted to do research. He was writing papers and teaching, but he was missing something. And I remember I indicated that Howard wanted him to teach and they didn't want him to do research, but he truly loved research. And he was ambitious. The key thing about Ernest Just, instilling him by his mother, Mary Matthews, that he was ambitious. And he felt like he deserved to be at the top research institutions. Why is that? He had an Ivy League education. He went to Kimball Union Academy. He started at SC State. He went to Kimball Union Academy, and he went to Dartmouth. There are not many Caucasian people, not many white people who had that kind of history. So he felt like he was elite, and he needed to be there. So in this push to do that, I remember I mentioned William Patton. He was an advisor to Just. And he introduced Just to Dr. Frank Rattan Lilly. Dr. Lilly was probably the most famous zoologist at that time. He was chairman of the Department of Zoology at the University of Chicago. And in those years, University of Chicago was like Harvard. It was like the top university, top 2-3 universities in the country. And he became Just's advisor, sponsor, and mentor. He was also director of the Marine Biological Laboratory. So he had a lot of power. And he was a brilliant man, but he had a lot of power. That said, he took Just to Woods Hole as his research assistant, which is the Marine Biological Laboratory. Just was 26 years old, and he was still taking classes in zoology. And he worked as a waiter to defray the cost of tuition. Now that's got to be, I mean, everything he was elite, he was married, he had kids, and he worked part-time as a waiter to defray the cost of tuition. That's determination. And again, instilling him from his mother, Mary Matthews. So at Marine Biological Laboratory, he trained a lot of really famous people. If you look them up, we don't have time to go into it, but he trained Louis Halbrun, Franz Schrader, Donald Lansfield, and Calvin Bridges. These were famous. They became famous in their own right, but they were trained by Ernest Just. He had great hands. He knew how to do research. He was very meticulous in the way he did that. And so just to give you a little flavor about research, it's addictive because you take an idea that you have and you work with it till you get a result or some intermediary result. Ernest loved research. He possessed a curiosity and determination to succeed, and he did. Frank Lieutenant Lee from Ken Manning's book and from Manchin's paper said Just's ability to design experiments was exceptional. He could design an experiment to get a result, and it was phenomenal the way he did that. Some of the things he's known for, simply washing glassware, being clean, creating a research environment that parallels the natural environment. What does that mean? That means that if something is occurring in nature, and we do this all the time in research, we have to mimic that to have to really publish those results. You can't do a nature experiment and not put the same dynamics together. And he's one of the few people who started to do that. Artificial parthenogenesis that we'll talk about in a second, and apical versus basolateral pole for cellular organization. That was a key paper. Bill Jeffrey, who came to the university to talk about Just, talked about this. Really, it's a simple experiment, but it's so important. We use this a lot today. We're looking at the apical, epithelial, apical, and basolateral pole for cellular organization. It's a phenomenal, it's a simple experiment, but it's a phenomenal result that's used constantly throughout science. And the key thing is that along with these people, Just helped to transform the Institute from a summer research retreat to a high-profile research organization that it is today. And if you go to Woods Hole on the Cape in Massachusetts, there's a big picture of Ernest Just in the meeting hall when you go there, because he was pretty famous for what he did and his contributions there. And that's just a picture of some of him performing some research in the laboratory there. Now, interestingly, as you may be aware, the NACP gives out an award every year. It's called the Springman Medal. It gives into a Black American primarily for something that they've done that's exceptional. In this case, it was research. It could be entertainment, could be medicine, could be law. It doesn't matter. But they give out this medal. The first one that was given to Ernest Just for research. He was an exceptional researcher. And this is interesting. It was given by then the governor of New York, Charles Seymour Whitman. And I don't know if you're familiar with that, but Christy Todd Whitman married his grandson, and she was governor of New Jersey. So Just was breaking bread and dealing with some of the top people in the country. And that's because of his will, his determination to succeed, and his excellence in writing and his excellence in research. So he sought excellence throughout his life. And so he received this in 1915. Now, he had conflict with his mentor, Franklin Lee, and you can understand this when I sort of explain this, because both men were strong-willed and had similar work habits. So they had ferocious discussions. Ernest wanted a PhD because he wanted to do research. He wanted the qualifications to do research. And so the way the research works then and even now, in order for you to do research on your own and not work for somebody, you have to have the advanced degree. Ernest wanted the advanced degree. His mentor literally said, no, why would you need it? You're elite, you have, you're teaching at Howard, you're doing research at the Marine Biological Laboratory. You got everything you need, so there's no reason for you to do this. But they had ferocious discussions. Ernest here has a strong will. I indicated that before, and that's because he had this education and strong will from his mother. He would prevail, and he entered the University of Chicago and received a PhD in 1916 in absentia from experimental embryology. A brilliant man, and had the confidence and the strength to follow through. And he was not accepting no for an answer. So again, he had his PhD. So let me recap one little thing. University, Kimball Union Academy, dark white people at that point in time could compete with his educational level. Okay, so there was always conflict. There was conflict with Jack Loeb. So Jack Loeb actually was really instrumental in getting Just the first Springman Medal. They became good friends. He was a Jewish-German physician who also was associated with Woods Hole. And they were close friends. And Jack Loeb was a powerful man. He could, if you wanted to go anywhere, if you need to go through Jack Loeb to get it done. And in 1922, there was a conference, and Dr. Just challenged Jack Loeb's theory of artificial parthenogenesis. Remember, I said that Just was one of the few people to say that you need to do research, you need to mimic what was going on in the environment. Jack Loeb did research, and his experiments were dirty. He did not mimic what was going on in the environment. So actually, Just was right, but nonetheless, Just got up in this meeting with all these scientists because he felt like he was just as strong as anybody, just as qualified as anybody else. He got up and said, Dr. Loeb, this is I see the work you're doing, but it's all wrong. So you can imagine you got a black dude in 1922 that's telling this German, this Jewish German physician who's very powerful and they've been friends, and he didn't tell him in secret. He gets up in this big meeting and says you're wrong. So clearly that didn't go over well. They fell out. Just wanted to go to Rockefeller University because that was the university for research. And clearly, with the people he trained and with his education, he was qualified to be there. Well, Jack Loeb held the keys to that, and he essentially said no, not because Just wasn't qualified, but because they had this scientific disagreement. And it's written in Manning's book that that's the reason why he did it. It's not so much because Just was definitely qualified. It was because of the professional disagreements, if you will. But scientists disagree all the time. But Jack Loeb really made it personal, which was not the best thing to do. Let me recap one thing. I forgot to mention this. When he got his PhD in absentia, he visited Chicago. And his family there, they were a group of dentists, and they had money and they had power. In fact, his cousins ran the NACP in Chicago, so they were instrumental in some of the decisions that were made for African Americans. But Just loved Chicago. It was a different type of big city from DC, and it was much more bustling, and so it was really. For Just, he loved it, and he loved the fact that he was elite, that he was there, and his family was elite, and they made decisions about the NAACP, but he loved Chicago, and he had fun there. They were having a celebration for Dr. Lilly for his contributions. He ran the Marine Biological Laboratory, and Just was asked to comment about it. And so it was a big fancy event, and they were all there, and Just was upset because he believed that Lilly should have done more for him when Jack Loeb sort of prevented him from going there. Lilly was powerful, probably could have done something, but he did not. And Just in this big celebration got up and said, and basically was not very nice. He said some things that were not very nice to Lilly, and basically said, you didn't help me at all, and all this stuff I've done for you, et cetera, et cetera. So you can imagine it wasn't his finest hour, but he was frustrated because of his situation. He wanted to do research, and he's in this country, and he not only believed that he was qualified and he could do this, but this was his goal. And he felt like Lilly should have helped him because after all, he stood up for Lilly against Jack Loeb. He said, you should stand up for me. Lilly didn't. But Just did that, and so again, I'll just say it wasn't his finest hour, but he was frustrated. I'm not condoning what he did, but I'm trying to give you context of where his mindset was and why he would say those sort of things, because he was a professional, but again, he felt like he was slighted, and he should have had more because he had this education and he trained these people, and he was such a brilliant man. Well, let me say this. He was a man before his time. Some of you may remember, I think it was the early 2000s, Tom Friedman, who was an American commentator in New York, writer for New York Times, wrote in this book that the world is flat. And what he meant is that the competition in the 1900s was really the United States and the United States and the United States. But when it came to the early 2000s, the competition was all over the world. And so Just understood that the world was flat even in those times. He understood that science was global, that he didn't have to stay in the United States, that he could go elsewhere to do science. And what happened with Lilly and with Jack Loeb, his ambitions was going to be, they were not going to allow him to do much anyway because of the professional disagreements that had become personal. So then he was like, I'm going abroad. And again, he was a man before his time because this was written in 2000. This was 1930s, 1920, 1930 when he started to do that. Now, funding, I mean, for research, you got to have funding. And so he received some funding from the Julius Rosenwald. You may be familiar with him, the starter of Seals and Roebuck. And he actually gave a lot of money to help Black causes. And there was a big migration from the South to the North, actually to Chicago. And Julius Rosenwald played a big role in that. But Just wrote him for money for research. And he also wrote to John D. Rockefeller, because Rockefeller saw the foundation that he wanted to improve the education in the United States regardless of race. So he helped a lot of African Americans, a lot of Black folk. Just received a grant of $80,000, which is a 5-year grant for his research. In today's market, it's probably over $1 million. So it was a fair amount of money at those days. So he headed abroad. Again, he was like, you're not going to stop me. He was determined. Remember, Mary Matthews gave this determination. He was determined to do better and determined to reach his goals. And he did. International travel. He loved international travel. Number one, he didn't have the baggage of the racial climate of the United States. And he was well respected for his research abilities. Now, he was respected in the United States, but the racial climate prevented him from not only going forward, but from people giving him the accolades that he really so rightfully deserved because of the people he trained. But anyway, and he first went to Naples, Italy at the Naples Zoological Station to perform research. And that was a different world. He was well respected and for there. He was the first American to perform research at the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute from 1930 to 1933. The first American, regardless of race, to perform research at the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute in Berlin. They have a big picture of him in Berlin. If you ever go there, there's a picture of Ernest E in one of the labs. And then, of course, he went to the famous Marine Biological Station in Roscoff, France, to also perform research. There's some evidence he was in Australia as well. Now, he had a bunch of experiences when he was there. His daughter, Margaret Just, who was 16 years old, she traveled with him. They kind of got to know each other a lot more. You know, he was a researcher, so he wasn't at home as much, but they got a chance to know each other. And Margaret was there for about 1 or 2 months. So they hung out, they went to dinner, and they really got a lot closer at that point. His other European experiences, he met Hedwig Snyder. She was a German nationalist who he met while he was in Berlin. They got married. He divorced Ethel Highwarden, and they got married in Latvia, which is a Russian province at that point in time. And it's thought that together they wrote perhaps his most famous book, which is The Biology of the Cell Surface, where he indicated that receptors on the cell surface that modulate and control how the cell responds. This is another really unique experience of his. I told you he was deeply religious. He read the religious writings of Otto von Harnack, and he invited him to his house in Berlin, and they drank champagne and wine, and they discussed the religion and the Bible. Again, Just was a biblical scholar. He understood the Bible. That was his upbringing. And he read about Otto von Harnack. And interestingly, he was about 80-something years old, but they had discussions and talked about the Bible and religion. This was one of the highlights of his experience. It was World War II, and Germany invaded France, and Hitler put everybody all the scientists in concentration camps. Just found himself in prison in France. Reinhard Dorn, who ran the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute, had connections with top officials in the German military. And Justin Hedwig were rescued at the dead of night, but he had to flee back to the United States, couldn't stay there. So he was able to get out of jail, and they flew or took a boat back to the United States. So we're down to the final days. It was 1940. He returned following his imprisonment, and Hedwig, his wife, was pregnant. Excuse me. Again, he was not on good terms with Howard. He, of course, he was not going to back down to anybody, but they were not on good terms. He tried to mend the relationship, but that wasn't really going to happen. But they let him come back, and it was with much less salary, and it was just not the best situation for him. It really wasn't. And this wasn't the best situation for him either. So imagine, if you will, an African-American black guy coming from back to Washington, D.C., 1939, 1940, during World War II, having divorced your African-American wife to marry this German woman who's 25 years your junior. So you can imagine the racial climate. It was just a mess. It didn't go over well. In fact, they couldn't stay together. Just lived with his sister. Remember, I mentioned he had a sister, Inez, in Washington, D.C., and Hedwig lived with her brother in New Jersey because it was just not going to happen. The racial climate wouldn't allow it. Just continued to work as best he could. And in the fall of 1941, he was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. And that's a tough cancer to have. And on October 27, 1941, he was buried in Lincoln Cemetery in Sweetland, Maryland. And this is actually from the internet, but this is an actual picture of his grave, of where he's buried. Some of his legacy: there are a series of clubs, lectures, awards for him. He published over scientific peer-reviewed papers. The biology of cell surface is his most famous. He also talked about, he's also published a laboratory manual for marine animals. That's his second book. Postage stamp of the E. Just Middle School, which was erected in 2002. And in 2010, there's a statue of Ernest Just, and I actually went up and I gave the presentation for that in Bowie. That's actually in Bowie, Maryland. Some of his research impact: he was the first to associate with cell surface changes in its stages of embryonic development. That's the biology of cell surface. And he was the first to incorporate medical research with medical teaching. So you could teach and also do research. That was one of the things that he was most known for. And he also discovered the mechanical roadmap to polyspermy, which means that fertilization of the egg, once one sperm comes in, there's a barrier placed around the egg that prevents other sperm from coming forward. That was, these are some of the things that, in addition to the other things I mentioned, washing glassware and that sort of thing, he's most known for those things as a scientist. There's a foundation for him that was begun in actually 2002 by Wesley Jarman. He's also on Omega. And he is in Texas now, but he runs the foundation in that area. Again, the Marine Biological Laboratory has that stamp there, and if you go up there, they'll have this on display because of the contribution that Ernest Just made to science education and all the famous researchers that he trained. And that stamp was in 1996. There's also the legacy of the Ernest Everett Just Symposium that I'm the organizer of, and that Mr. Kurt Walker has attended and has played a major role in some of the success that we've had. We have an impact segment where we talk about interesting facts about Ernest Just. We have role models. These are students and faculty role models that sort of help the kids that are in attendance to decide what path they need to take. And we have science presentations about this as well. It was begun in 2000 by Dr. Renoff, and in the last years, we've increased that more than tenfold. We started with about 15 to 20 students, and Mr. Kurt Walker knows about that. We had a few students there, and now we have more than tenfold, upwards of 200 and sometimes 400 students to attend. And these are just some pictures of the event that we've had over the years. This is the symposium for the coming year. And if anybody is interested in seeing that, it's going to be this Friday for 2021, and it'll be virtual. and we'll have our university officials to talk. And then we'll have Lacey McKinnon Smith. She'll talk about COVID-19. Theodore Walker. I didn't talk about this, but Just became religious toward the end of his life. And Theodore Walker, along with his wife, Lily Mae Jenkins, have written a book where they talk about some of his religious teachings. It's a manuscript that hasn't been published, that had been previously published. And Theodore Walker, along with his wife, who's instrumental in doing that, Lily Mae Jenkins, will talk about that on Friday. We have a couple of graduate students and undergraduate students to talk. Asio Bay, she's a Muslim. She'll talk about her research. She's a senior level graduate student, and we have 2 undergraduate students, one from Anderson University and one from Coastal Carolina. They'll also talk. And we have Florine Reeder. He'll talk about Crohn's disease and some of the fibrosing that occurs there and some of the actual treatments. And so I also encourage any of you to see that. And if you want to know that information, you can contact me either through Mr. Kurt Walker, and I'll give you the Zoom information so you can see that. We've also begun an endowment where we want to have what we would call just scholars. These are undergraduate students who come to the university for graduate level education in whatever discipline they want. And we have begun to generate funds that will sponsor students in that regard. Now, we've also began a Ernest Everett Just Foundation Charleston chapter, where we are trying to introduce science to students. Our mission statement is to inspire youth to develop science and math mentality through education that will enable them to pursue STEM, science and math, engineering careers and make the world better. And our vision is STEM for now and for future generations. And if anybody's interested in that, you can contact me or Mr. Kurt Walker, and we can obviously give you some additional information about that as well. And just lastly, to talk about some highlights, Ernest was a complicated yet a brilliant man. You can imagine, I've given you a flavor for his upbringing, so you get some idea of what kind of person he was. But he also made it to the top of his profession. He wrote letters to Mussolini, who wrote back. Not many people could say that. And some of his, a highlight, of course, his marriage to Ethel, his 3 children, High Wharton, his daughter, who is the granddaughter, Kathy Just Robinson. I'm pretty close to her. I know her pretty well. Maribel and Margaret, I'm not familiar that, I know that they had children, but I'm not so familiar with them. Offspring from Hedwig, Elizabeth, and I know her daughter, Mary Just Adair, and I'm also familiar with her. But these are some of the highlights and the contributors to the legacy of Ernest Everett Just. And with that, let me again thank Mr. Walker, Kurt Walker, for allowing me to be here in the 6th District, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that anyone has on this subject.
Dr. Reeves,
Yes, sir.
I just got to commend you for an excellent presentation this evening, very informative. And as always, I see something that makes me want to ask a few questions, as we always have dynamic conversations about Dr. Just. First and foremost, I would just like to maybe ask a question or two about 2 periods of his life.
Yes, sir.
Very specifically. Number one, I learned on a Omega Psi Phi, a recent on the Achievement Week, we had a very visual and dynamic history lesson during that time, and the brothers shared some information about Just's time at Howard University, and you know they shared that Dr. Just was so instrumental not only in founding Omega Psi Phi fraternity, but he was very instrumental with a lot of the other student organizations, especially the drama club. Can you talk a little bit about that period in terms of his time at Howard University?
Yeah, so it's interesting. You know, when you think about research, you have to kind of push forward, but Just, for what it's worth, is not talked about very much, but he had a big heart. And he felt compelled not just to do things for himself, which he did, but he also wanted to do things for others. And so part of that, what he did for the fraternity and other groups at Howard University, was to he was one of the few people with the strength to push back the university administration officials and allow some of the students to go forward. And they trusted him, and he was a strong, again, I can't say that enough, because it's because of his strong will that he was able to do that. So he would talk to university officials, he would talk to administration officials, and he would protect and defend the students and their right to have certain organizations, their right to do certain things. And that's probably, frankly, that's probably one of the reasons, another reason why the administration didn't like him very much, because he wouldn't, for lack of a better word, he wouldn't just do what they wanted. He would if he thought it was in his best interest, obviously, but he would protect the other students, and he would defend them and defend their right to have certain organizations. And that's a tribute to him having a big heart and wanting to do for others something bigger than he was to do for others.
When you think about the period of his life when, of course, he met up with the Nazis, can you describe a little bit about that more in detail of what he encountered, how he got out and made it back to the States?
So he, interestingly, just Reinhard Dorn ran the facility, the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute in Germany. He ran it, and he invited Just to do research there. So Just was there, and he made several relationships. He had several relationships there. One of the women that he met, this was between his interactions or his disagreeing with his wife in Hedwig. They had a relationship, and they became close. So when he when he was locked up for the Germans, he knew that this was not a good situation. He wanted to get out. So he talked to her. She talked to her dad. And again, Reinhard was he was a well-known person, and he had friends in the German military. So Hitler was not very familiar with this. Just was not, he was a scientist, but he didn't know anything about physical science. He was a life scientist. Physical science is where you make the bombs and all of that. But Hitler just put all the scientists in the concentration camps. Just was a biological scientist. So it was standing to reason, if he was a physical scientist, to be honest, I think he'd had trouble getting out. But because he was a biological scientist, they was like, there's no reason to keep you here anyway. So, but at the same time, he was smuggled out at night. And he was told that we let you out, but you got to get out of the country. And frankly, they did. So he was fortunate to get out of the country. Again, he probably had pancreatic cancer at that point, even though it didn't, he wasn't exactly diagnosed. He probably had it at that point because he was a bit ill. So he was able to get out, and that's to his credit. He was a resilient guy. And of course, Hedwig had to go with him, that sort of thing.
Can you talk a little bit about the relationship that Dr. Just had developed with the other luminaries, the African-American luminaries at the time, like W.E.B. Du Bois and several others, in terms of how they played a role in each other's lives? I know that Du Bois was instrumental in helping him get nominated for the Spring On. Can you talk about that?
Yes, he was. So it's interesting. So Just, he knew Du Bois. And if you look at your history, Washington Carver and Du Bois had this sort of debate, and they're both kind of right in many respects. Just for the most part, he would do things to help people, but he stayed out of politics. He didn't want that to be a part of his legacy. Number one, I think because he didn't have a whole lot of time, because research requires so much mental effort. And then he was also teaching. You got to remember, he had 3 kids. He was training people in research. So I think, as I understand him a little bit, he didn't want to get into politics a whole lot, but he was probably along the lines with W.B. Du Bois, because he was such an educated man. He understood the importance of education. And whereas Washington Carver obviously talked about the hands, but I think going back to the crux of your question, he stayed out of politics, but he was well respected. And he did have a relationship with Du Bois, because they had met on occasion. Historically, I'm not sure he and Washington Carver had any sort of relationship, but I know that he and Du Bois did. And again, he tried to, from my perspective, from what I understand about him, he tried to stay out of politics. that sort of thing. He did have one graduate student, though, the first Black African-American graduate student. She's at the University of Pittsburgh, and he was her mentor.
And let's just talk a minute about the early years of Dr. Just. And
Yes.
when we look at the school that eventually became South Carolina State College and now university, I remember being at the symposium, and one of the presenters was from Howard University, and I can't remember her name right now, but she spoke about what it was like when Just got to South Carolina State, or the Negro school at that time, about no electricity,
Right.
no paved roads. Can you talk about how he came up out of all of that to become this world-renowned scientist?
It's interesting because I have to go back to this, and I said this before, but because of his strong will, his mother instilled in him the determination and the importance of education. So even though he was at SC State, and it was obviously a Black institution, they didn't have all the money that a Kimball had or some of the other institutions, but he was determined to succeed. He was determined to get his degree. And as you saw, he got it early. And he was such a good writer. I mean, it was one of those things where you couldn't deny him that. And yes, it was not the best circumstance, but he prevailed. I mean, difficulties, and it actually, if you think about it, Kurt, it kind of propelled him to go forward, because difficulties make you stronger. So he went to SC State, and yes, the facilities were not the best. Very minimal sort of things that he needed to be successful. But again, he was an excellent writer, and he understood where he was. But even still, with the licentiate of education, on comparatively speaking, he was an educated man, because he taught in the Black public schools. Now, again, the legacy at SC State was that it provided him some form of education, and it gave him that certificate to teach. So even though it wasn't the best of circumstances, he was able to prevail and still become the top of his class. And so interestingly, SC State didn't have the best facilities, and he was competing there, but he made it to the top of his class, and everywhere he went, he made it to the top of his class. Whether it was at Kimball, whether it was at Dartmouth, he made it to the top of his class. And so that's his dedication to success and the strong will that was instilled in him, from Mary Matthews Just.
Okay. Well, I'm going to let Brother Johnson assist us. We got several questions from our audience, and I know they are ready to get those questions asked and answered. So I will let Brother Johnson or Brother McCoy jump in and assist us. And thank you so much, my brothers.
Yes, sir, please.
Thank you, Brother DR. Just a couple quick questions.
Yes.
For those that have raised their hands, hit the raise hand, please put your question in the chat. We're not opening up the the participant mics. As Brother DR indicated, there's 7 questions. I'll just take these pretty much in order. The first is from David Chambly. Did Howard University oppress women by not allowing them to teach there if their husband was teaching there?
Yeah, I mean, so I said this a couple of times, so I want you to go back, if you will, don't think about it as now. During those days, it wasn't oppression, it was the way things were done. Certainly it wasn't fair. Again, she was an accomplished woman in her own right. And of course that wouldn't happen today, but if you go back to that time and period, everything was run by men. And so it was like, well, we can't have you here. Your husband has this position, maybe you should be home and doing other things. I don't mean to demean her. I just want to take you back to that period in time. Yes, there was some oppression of women, just like there's some things that happen today that we might say that you're oppressing women. But if you go back to that time, the early 1900s, that time, that point in history, it was accepted, and it was something that people just accept. Okay, your husband's there, you don't need to be here. And so she went to Dunbar, and so yes, they did, and it was just, unfortunately, it was a sign of the times during that point.
The next two questions are going to be on scholarship.
Yes.
The first one, are there high school scholarships through the E.E. Just Foundation? If so, what is the process for applying for the scholarships?
So we certainly are we want to do that. We've just initiated that, and so we're trying to generate funds. We have some funds there, but we want to get a little bit more. And so our goal is certainly to support the Omega Psi Phi fraternity. But at this point, I want to mention that this is what we're doing. We hope to, COVID has slowed us down a little bit. We hope to have some additional funds a little bit down the road. So we're early in that process. So I would say sit tight. Eventually, we're going to have some funds in there. We do have some, but we don't want to use them until we get a little bit more that we can like sort of live off the interest, if you will. So I'm going to say sit tight, and we definitely, I'll say sit tight and stay tuned. We definitely want to support the Omega Psi Phi fraternity or the members in that. And we want to start with high school students and the college level students. We try and generate some funds for the fraternity for that. So we're going to say that I'll simply say stay tuned and stand by, and in a little bit of time, a little bit down the pike, we will have some funds and we'll have more information for you.
What would you say was his greatest challenge studying abroad as a Black man?
Oh, well, abroad, really, he was respected then. So really, there was not much of a challenge at that point. In fact, he was almost admired because he had published these papers. He had done this research. He was admired. Abroad was really not an issue for him, and because he was so respected. Because he was invited to Germany, he went to Italy, and he went to Ross. I mean, he was respected. That wasn't his biggest challenge. His biggest challenge really was in America. It was when he got his PhD. So he had a challenge at Howard, because again, and I want to take you back. Think about this. So Howard was pragmatic. They were saying, we need you to teach medical students because that was a way out for a lot of people. For a lot of our people, it was a way out. But Jeff wanted to do research. So, and he was good at it, but it wasn't probably the best thing for him to sort of do, or the most economical thing for him to do, but it didn't matter to him. He wanted to do that. So I get it from both sides. But at the end of the day, people should do what makes them happy, regardless of where they are. And research made him happy, so it should allow them to do it. But I understand what Howard was trying to do. They were saying, listen, for our people to get ahead, we need to go to medical school and make money and treat people to make a healthy society. I get that. But from Jeff's perspective, he wanted to do research. So that was a real hard roadblock. The other was the fact that the scientific community, here you have this Black guy with his Ivy League education who was smarter than a lot of people who he trained, and yet he wasn't given the recognition. So that was a hard pill for him to swallow. The Howard situation and the situation in the United States were his most obstacles or the biggest challenges. Abroad, he was respected. He had done his research, and he was really well respected when he got abroad. And so that was really not much of a challenge for him. Obviously, being in a concentration camp was difficult. Glad he was able to get out, but he was well respected abroad.
The next question, and we've got five questions total
Yes.
remaining. We're gonna,
Yes, sir.
Brother D, I recommend we stop it at these five. What was his drive to begin Omega Psi Phi? What did he recognize in the other three founders?
Jeff was an academic at heart. I mean, even though he was an athlete, he did the long stretch. So he had some athletic prowess, but he was an academic. And he realized the importance of having an organization for Black men at that time. So his drive was this organization, the principles that the Omega Psi Phi stood on. That was his drive to do it, and so he fought for that for the students because he's an academic, and these young men were smart young men, and these were young men that worked. So this was his contribution or his drive was to ensure their success, because at the end of the day, he was an academic and he wanted the organization to be all about academics.
Okay. The next question from a former DR, former Grand Officer, Brother Scott. What do you think Dr. Just would think of the Omega Psi Phi fraternity today? It seems that our scholarship is not as strong as it was when the fraternity was founded.
Well, I'm not sure. I think that, that in life things cycle. Every organization goes through twists and turns and ups and downs. I'm not sure what he would say, but I think the core principles have not changed. Sometimes you get differences in leadership and you get conflicts that takes place. But my philosophy is that we were made for conflict because everybody's an individual. The key thing is, can you make that conflict go forward? So, I'm not sure how he would feel about it, but I think if the core principles are the same, I think he would say that the best for the fraternity is yet to come. The more members, and of course, maybe a redirection for some of the scholarships. But I would say that he would still be proud of the organization because, again, he went through some difficulties in his life. His life was not all roses. So you have that sort of thing in life. You get individuals, you get individual thinking, and sometimes and I'm sure the people that are listening here have been through this. I know I have in my life. You start to do something, you say, oh, it's going to be great, and it doesn't work out. Sometimes it doesn't. It's just the way it is. But you stick with it, and at the end of the day, the organization, I think, while it's going through some ups and downs, it is still strong. It'll be even stronger as time goes on.
Did the fraternity in and of itself have an influence on Dr. Just's success?
Interesting question. I would have to say yes, because now there's nothing that I know definitively that I can say, oh, absolutely it did. But I know from my own experiences, you change organization or you start an organization, it changes you. You become better as a result of that. So I can see him listing those principles of manhood that I listed earlier, and how sometimes when you put things down on paper or you see it printed, it has more impact whether you say it. So I think that I would say that certainly it had to have some impact upon him. It made him stand taller because he was defending something to the administration officials that he knew would be unique and that he hoped that would last a long time, and it looks like it has. So I would think yes, it had an impact upon him. It made him better. It made him stronger because it made him think about those principles and try to espouse those in his own life.
Next question from a former DR, Brother Penn. Is it too late to make a movie about Brother Just?
Funny you should say that. Kurt Walker and I have had discussions about this. I've actually generated some contacts. It's a long, drawn out story. I won't go into it, but it's something that I want to do. You got to be, the thing about it, the timing has to be just right. When I think with the Trump legacy, we may have to chill for a little bit, but I do have, I just need to push forward. The National Endowment of the Arts. I do have Ken Manning, and I have contacts at the National Endowment of Arts and contacts in Hollywood. I think a documentary movie is first, and then perhaps a Hollywood movie, because it's a fantastic story. It's a great life. I mean, there's some things I left out here. It's a great life. And even though he died at 58, it's a fantastic life from beginning to end. And the Ivy League education and the experiences he had, writing to Mussolini, traveling all over the world, coming back, coming to Howard, how he did with his young German wife, divorcing. I mean, it's a fantastic story. So I would say, again, I would say stay tuned and stand by. We'll see. How about that?
Okay. You mentioned offsprings. Does Dr. Just have any descendants that are now Omega? Who and how are they related?
I do. That's a good question. I don't know. I'm really close to Catherine Just Robinson. She's the oldest granddaughter. And we talk relatively regularly. And I don't know, I have to ask her. She's a little bit of a historian herself. And so we've had discussions about several things. I don't know. But I'm gonna write that down because that'd be something I have to ask her. That's a good question.
Yeah, we got a relative that's out in California right now, Brother Terry Just. So yes, we do.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay. Oh, fantastic. Fantastic.
Okay. The last two questions.
Sure.
I understand mentorship is important, and Brother Just has Dr. Loeb and Dr. Willie. Who did Dr. Just mentor? Did he have a Black mentor that was not mentioned?
A mentee, you mean?
Yes. Who did? Well, two things. Did he have a Black mentor that was not mentioned?
Yeah, I see what
And
you're
it's
saying.
also, the question also asked, who did Dr. Just mentor?
Yeah, so I indicated this a little bit earlier. I would say his mentor, his Black mentor, was his mother. Okay, he was at Dartmouth when she passed away, and he came to her service, and he never came back to Charleston after that. But there, you got to remember, during those days, there were not many African Americans who, I mean, and I don't know how to say this appropriately, but who could talk to Just. He had an Ivy League education, so there wasn't that many people who had graduated. I mean, there was Du Bois, but who else did we have? Not very many who could mentor him. So you needed somebody like Lily, who was chairman of a department, or who was a well-known, or not even the world, but just a scientist who would talk to him. There wasn't very many. So I would say his mother was really his Black mentor. Other than that, his life was really with white folks for the most part. He didn't deal with too many Black folks. Once he left Charleston, if you look at his educational path, he was for the most part dealing with the majority of white folks. Now he did have family in Chicago, and I mentioned at Howard, but he had some friction with administrations, and I'm not familiar if he had anybody at Howard who kind of took him under his wings, as you would understand it. And I'm trying to remember, it just escapes me, but I can give you that information in a second. I just can't remember it. But he was a mentor to the first Black graduate student at the University of Pittsburgh. I can't remember her name, it's just drawing a blank right now, but he was her mentor for her research projects, that sort of thing.
Okay. What do you think Just legacy should be, not just Omega Psi Phi fraternity, but to all Americans?
So, and this is why, we had a question about the movie. I want to bring that forward because, again, a man before his time, understanding that research is global, understanding that the importance of, unless you do research, you don't really get this, or unless you think about this, washing glassware, so simple and yet so important. Creating an environment that mimics what happens in the natural environment. So fundamental to research. Those are the types of things that he needs to get recognition for. And also some of his theories. I think that at that point in time, and such a prolific writer, if you look at some of his writings, even in that time, it's phenomenal. So I would say some of the things that I've mentioned is his legacy. His legacy for the importance of education, the importance of learning, a lifelong learner, and even the importance of having something bigger than yourself, with what he performed and what he did at Howard University for the Omega Psi Phi fraternity, and as indicated by Mr. Walker, for all the clubs that he supported and he fought the administration for. So I would say this mentoring, and also his scientific prowess, and even his teaching. I think for that, he should be upheld as one of as a great American, frankly.
Okay, and the final question, what was Dr. Just's financial status at the end of his life?
Let's say not the best. Not that he squandered it, but I think he didn't save as much as he perhaps could have, but he lived a great life. He didn't necessarily leave a lot for his children, but on his own, he lived a great life. And again, Again, you know, he was an elite in DC and really elite in the country. So he had a great life. He did not leave a lot of money or property for his children. But you know, that said, no one is perfect. I mean, you can't do 100% of the things that are right. You know, he's human and with human frailties, and so his scientific legacy I think is great, and he wasn't able to leave much for his kids, and so that's just the way things are sometimes.
Brother DR, there are two last questions that are pretty similar,
Okay.
that probably make sense. The last question is regarding his relationship with the founding fathers. You know, did that relationship grow as they all became grown men and beyond, or was that just pretty much at the founding of the fraternity?
Well, you know, I'm not 100% sure, to be honest, but from what I know Just a little bit better than I know the others, because I've known family members and I've been doing things about Just for a while. The question for him would have been, how much time did he have? And these were accomplished men in their own right. And so I would say that they knew and respected one another. I'm not sure how much time he had to spend with them, because if you look at his life and the fact that research really is domineering in terms of your time, again, coupled with the fact that he's teaching at Howard University, I'm not really sure, but my sense would be that they knew each other and they respected one another, but I'm not sure how much interaction they had.
Brother DR, that's all of our questions.
Thank you so much, Brother Johnson and Brother McCoy, for definitely getting us through and making this presentation tonight possible. We want to definitely thank Dr. Reeves for his excellent presentation. And I just want to share that, you know, we've been doing a lot of work over the years to make sure our founding father at some point receives his proper designation in the historical context and here, the city of his birth. And so much so that Dr. Reed shared earlier in his slide presentation that right now there is no street, no serious monument or statue for Dr. Just, other than that marker that's in Inspection Street, where the location of his parents' home was there. And so we're trying to make an effort to make more things possible in the name of Dr. Just here in Charleston. So much so that a couple of years ago, back in, I think it's 2018, Grand Basileus Knox, he was immediate past Grand Basileus, but before he left office, he made sure that the Ernest E. Just Endowment was able to start off, and he donated $25,000 to that effort. And we, as a local chapter here in Charleston, we matched it and raised some additional funds. So we've raised, I think, initially somewhere about $37,000. And we're going to be making more strides with that, because we were able to get the support of the city of Charleston so that we can erect the monument in a new park that's coming. It's slated to open, and it's called the Carl Richardson Park, after two prominent families back there in the Maryville, Ashleyville area. And in that park, the mayor of Charleston, he met with our Grand Basileus, Dr. David E. Marion, and Dr. Tony Knox. And he expressly said that he was gonna make sure that we honor Dr. Just in that new park. And part of that fundraising efforts, my brothers and sisters, is that number one, we're gonna raise money to make sure that statue is erected. And at the same time, the dual purpose is to raise money to increase the funds for the Just Endowment. So it's going to be a busy year coming up. The park is slated to open the spring of 2022. And so we're going to be at work very hard, making sure that dream is now a reality. And so Dr. Reeves has, you know, we must give him the credit he's due, because when he started the symposium with Dr. Mironoff It was, again, he said it was with a small group of students, and now they have an auditorium full of students traveling from all over the Southeast, even students that come as far as from the Just Middle School, and with Brother Wesley Jarman and those students in terms of coming to Charleston to be in person. So we have a new format in terms of this virtual environment. So I encourage you all to make time in your schedule to tune in. We'll be sure that our district KRS, Brother Cedric Lucky, sends that out for the brothers, and we'll promote that so you can schedule some time to be with us on Friday. But again, brother, thank you for a dynamite job. Nothing less is expected of you, my brother. You came and showed up and pleased us in more ways than one. And this from the hearts of all our brothers in the Mighty Sixth District and our visiting family, friends who were on the presentation tonight. We want to thank you for all that you do for the Sixth District. And with that being said, you're right, that virtual hand of applause. Brother, thank you so much. And right now, brothers, we're going to welcome to the floor, back to the floor, our district chaplain, Brother Travis Alexander, the maestro, to dismiss us with a word of prayer. And thank you so much for joining us this evening on the behalf of the brothers of the Mighty Sixth District. Brother Alexander.
Bow your heads, brothers and friends. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this meticulous and tremendous presentation made by Dr. Reeves, recapping history that may have fallen stale in some of our minds of this great academician, this biologist, this professor, this founder of this great Omega Psi Phi fraternity. We thank you, Lord, that the second card, scholarship, is no accident as we see through his life, as we also see that Omega men live by tenacity, as we must persevere to get the finer things in life and to meet and lift and give back as we climb. Thank you. Keep us all safe. Keep us all COVID free. Thank you for Black History Month and Brother Carter G. Woodson and for all of those great warriors who helped us to be where we are today. Let us never forget them in our lives. Bless the Mighty Sixth District. Bless all of our district officers and our fearless leader, our district representative, who continues to present all of these top quality programs in the midst of this pandemic. We thank you for him. We thank you for our tech team as we burden them, Lord, week after week and month after month. We thank you for the tremendous job that they have done and are continuing to do to help Omega Psi Phi stay forefront in lifting up the community. These blessings we ask and these prayers and praises we lift before your name. In Jesus' name, amen.
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 Thank you so much, my brother. Great job, Dr. Reeves.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much. And you guys have a good evening.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Brother DR.